The United States Air Force was formed on September 18th of 1947, the same year that this Scott 800B was made.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. Atta boys, give it a gun. Down we dive, spouting a flame from under. Off with one hell of a roar. We live in fame, we're down in flame. Nothing will stop the USAF force.
I'd like to wish the United States Air Force a very happy birthday and a great thank you to all of the women and men who have given so much of their lives to make our Air Force successful and in protecting us. Thank you and happy birthday, U.S. Air Force. One by one, I am checking the resistors on these little circuit boards. And the truth is, if these resistors are good, I'm leaving them in place. There's no point in upsetting this circuitry if I can help it. So far, every one of these resistors is checked within about 5% of its rated value. And I don't see any reason to yank these out. I mean, if they had drifted out by more than 10%, they'd be replaced. Now, I'm going to do the same thing with these resistors. I'll check them. And if they haven't drifted, I'll leave them alone. If they have drifted, I'll yank them out. You see some of the original flux that's all over the place in these. I like to scrape that out and clean that out if I can. I just like to leave it neater than I found it. Here's another one of those capacitors. This one's going to be an oil capacitor. And you take a look at the language on this one. You see that? That first oil condenser, I would not have opened it had I seen this. This condenser, I will leave it alone if it isn't leaking. The reason I'm going to be changing that one is because it appears to be leaking, but I don't see any moisture around this one, so I'll leave it be. These things will last a long time if you don't bother them. Okay, there's a perfect example of how what looks like a mica mold or other brand of mica capacitor is really just a film capacitor, an old jelly roll capacitor inside of a plastic case. The way you read this one, of course, is you start at the top. The arrow is pointing to the right here. You start at the top and you read this way first, and then you read this way. So you start right here, and you're going to read two significant digits and the multiplier. The two significant digits are always on these. The ones that have two rows of colors are the last two on the top, reading from left to right. And then the multiplier is the first one, reading from right to left on the bottom. So we have 103. Well, we all know that 103 is a 0.01 microfarad capacitor, or a 10 times 10 to the 3 picofarad. Okay, so that's how you read these. Obviously, this thing here is a jelly roll film capacitor. The old paper and foil kind, I imagine, and it's got to go. These things have a terrible reputation. I don't care about the brand. They're often bad, and I'm just going to assume that this one's bad. I have lots of good quality capacitors, and I'll just put one in its place. Just thought I'd give you a little idea on what we do with these things. On this capacitor block right here, this wax-filled block, all the resistors on that board to the right of it were all in good shape. They're all good. They all measured well within the 10%. In fact, only one of them came even close to the 10% out, and that was at 0.9. That was at 9.7% out. I am assuming that the jelly roll capacitors that are inside that block are bad. They so often are unless they're oil filled, and so I replaced them with these good quality Panasonic film capacitors of the same value, so they should be fine. Those are 0.05s. Of course, it's not exactly the same value. These are 0.047s. They'll work just fine. Now, as I pointed out earlier, there's that oil filled, and I am leaving that one alone. This is all FM stuff right here, and as long as I stay away from those adjustments, I'll be good. I really, really don't like to mess with those because they are usually good, and you mess with them and you screw them up. Okay, here's an example of wiring around the capacitor blocks. You see these two, this one right here and this one right here. This is a 0.5 single capacitor, 0.5 microfarad, 600 volt, and this is a 0.05 600 volt. This little mess right here was already on this capacitor. I don't know why it was there, but there's no point in messing with it. So what I did, rather than pull these off and restuff them, not sure I see the point in restuffing, all I did was install some mini terminal strips on the lugs, the mounting lugs for these. Ran the correct value of capacitors across the non-grounded terminal of these little terminal strips, and then connected the various wires to those terminals. That's all there is to it. Why do I do this? Wouldn't it be much neater to go ahead and restuff the blocks? They'd look easy enough to get out of there. I had to determinate the wires anyway. Well, like I said 100 times, I don't like to destroy the historical record of how these things were built, so I prefer to leave them alone. It was really no easier to do this than it would be to do that, and I wouldn't have to use up my terminal strips, except that if I restuffed them, then I'm pulling out original construction, and I don't like to do that. Down there on these little resistor boards, I checked each resistor carefully, and I found a couple that were out of spec. There's one right there. That was a 1300 ohm resistor. I don't have any 1300s, but I have a 1200 that reads at 12, I think 1211 ohms, so that works out perfectly. And let's see, there's none down there. These all tested out great. The little 1300 down there tested out to be 1261, I think, so that worked out okay. There's the 25 microfarad 25 volt capacitor, and there's another one way down there on the tube socket. And so this section is about done. We'll keep moving. Okay, we'll take one last look under this chassis. I think I'm pretty well done here. You know, so here's where I started, over here. And I replaced the capacitors that were in those wax-filled blocks. And I checked all those resistors. And I found that all the resistors were fine except for a couple, which I replaced. And I checked all the resistors on that on that resistor block as well, and I didn't find any bad ones there. That capacitor block is oil filled. I'm going to leave that alone. If I run into trouble, I'll remember that I didn't change anything in there, and so I'll keep an eye on that. I'll make sure. Moving around the chassis, now we're on the controls, and you see this is like the mode switch. This chooses phono, radio, auxiliary, that sort of thing. So I took some deoxit and I cleaned up all these wafer switches. I didn't go crazy on them. I don't like to beat them up. I just cleaned them up the way they're supposed to. Clean the inside of that treble pot. I did what I could on this sensitivity potentiometer, but it is basically sealed. I was able to get some contact cleaner in there. It was pretty sticky. And I was able to get some contact cleaner in there, loosen it up, and I kept doing it little tiny bit by little tiny bit until what was coming out of the shaft was clean. That's how I tell sometimes. And then I let it dry for a long time, and then I squirted the smallest amount of deoxit in there and moved it around. But if it's sealed like that, it's going to take forever for deoxit to dry out, so I thought I'd leave that be without getting too excited. Those are the motor leads. When I install the front panel on this, that motor will be connected back up there. Really didn't do a whole lot here. New resistor there. That resistor was out of spec. Everything looks pretty good down there. And I cleaned that base control up real well. The AM band switch is just a 2-position wafer switch. I cleaned that up with some contact cleaner and then deoxit. Volume control, same as that sensitivity, very sealed. This one was even more sealed than the sensitivity. There wasn't a lot I could do with it. I did the best I could. I was able to get a little bit of contact cleaner in there and a tiny bit of deoxit, but not much. And I want to be careful that I don't put stuff in there that can't get back out. All right, so both of these capacitors, they're single capacitor blocks. I replaced those. These were wax filled. I replaced the capacitors in these. This one here is a 0.5. I replaced with a 0.47. And that was a 0.05, which I replaced with a 0.047. Replaced a couple of resistors. But, you know, every resistor that I did not replace was well within 10%. I see in this glaring light here that I have a little bit of flux to clean off. That's old flux from when this thing was made. I'll clean that up, though. I don't like the looks of that. These sockets are weird, and they have like a speckled, they're made of like a speckled plastic, so they're not dirty. That's just the way they are. I replaced this there was an electrolytic can there, and I installed these two electrolytics in its place, and I just cut the wires. You never ever install replacement electrolytics or replacement caps across the old cap terminals. Just bad practice. I checked that coil, that choke, that base control choke, and I got roughly, I think, let's take a look here. 258.7 ohms DC. So check that. It's a good choke. Clean both of these switches. These are switches that have to do, I think, with the direction of the motor. They're on solenoids. They control those switches there. Clean those switches up. Basically, that's about it. Anything that I left needed to be left and didn't need to be changed. I did not clean these two wafer switches, so I'll hit those with some contact cleaner. Oh yeah, I did. I sprayed them, but I need to get this side of this one here a little bit better. I see that doesn't look too good, so I'm going to improve that. Let's take a look at this one here. Yeah, I could get these two a little better. With this bright light, I can see that. Okay, here you go with the top side. I haven't put the cover over the tuning condenser yet, but remember I had some pretty bad cans that were in pretty rough shape, so I cleaned those up, painted one of them because it was just too far gone. But it fits in well. You know, when I paint those, they don't look too bad. Fits in well with the decor, so to speak. This is looking pretty good. I'm going to clean that tuning condenser up real quick, and I'm not going to replace those resistors. Checked out okay, and that little white cap there, I think I mentioned earlier, is oil filled. I think I'm going to leave that be for now, and if I need to change that, I'll be able to identify that as a problem. There's that capacitor can. Was able to keep the sticker. The sticker's not perfect, but I was able to keep it. You know, this is one of those cases where a lot of the individual sections are not perfect, but the sum total is not too bad. The sum total is pretty good. So I think this is going to be a nice looking machine when it's installed. I'm kind of looking forward to it. So there we go. Remember I've got to hit those buttons too. And I'll make some duplicate buttons. I'll polish those up so they're as clear as they can be. But next up is that front. Well, actually, I'll probably hit those buttons next because they're easy to get to now. Once I get the buttons done, then I'll do the front panel. All right, guys, it's time for me to get showered up and get ready for work tomorrow. On October 14th of 1947, Army Air Force's Captain Chuck Yeager became the first person to fly faster than the speed of sound, Mach 1. He flew in this aircraft, the Bell XS-1, later to become known as the X-1. This airplane was built specifically for the purpose of research. It was meant to study the effects of supersonic flight on aircraft controls, and on the people that fly them. This aircraft was never designed to be put into full production, and it was never designed to be a military aircraft. This was probably one of the first, if not the first, aircraft ever designed specifically for research. Captain Yeager became one of the first in a long line of Air Force and NASA pioneers who have explored the very edge of our capabilities in air and space. Hats off to Captain Yeager and to the United States Air Force. From Salt Lake City, this is Michael, and I'll see you next time. That's all for now.